Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third episode of Cloudicorns, a podcast for anybody who's interested in SAP, Cloud, Google Cloud, and everything that is good. Diego, how are you?
I'm doing great. If you happen to be watching the episode, you will see that, my face doesn't, communicate the same thing. This is because I have not been sleeping for the past 6 days due to my babies, but that's parenthood, and I'm not complaining. I'm just informing. So yeah, that's how I'm going. How about you? All good?
All good. I have only cats, so they don't keep me awake, luckily, because otherwise they wouldn't be fed. But yeah, I understand that paternity is a little bit harder, so hang on in there. I'm sure they will appreciate it.
One day, hopefully.
One day. Yes. A shout out to all parents who are working parents and are surviving in this pandemic with their children. So let's move into what we're covering today in our wonderful podcast. We're going to do an intro to cloud. And the reason we're going to do an intro to cloud is that we figured out that what is obvious to those of us who live in this mess of cloud computing is not necessarily obvious to everybody. So we will be covering a little bit of the fundamentals of cloud, why somebody would choose to go into cloud, infra as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and all of this in the context of SAP.
Absolutely. So, we have been receiving feedback from you guys, and we know that we have a wide spectrum of audience, if you put it in a way. We definitely have people that are very technical like us, but also we have people in more in the spectrum of, managing or functional, and that's why we want to spend some time today to give the basis, again, informal definitions, just our opinion on the topic, but just to give a more concrete definition of that. And without further ado, I will start giving my personal definition, and then we can go to yours, Lou. But from my point of view, what I can see, what I see or define as cloud computing, or the cloud, is everything that I cannot touch but I interact with, on a day-to-day basis, right? So usually we're used to have computers in our houses, or we used to have servers at work. And in those servers, we were able to deploy our software and just interact with it. And for me, cloud, and we are about to see in a few minutes one slide that you prepared for us today, where there's different flavors, if you want to call it in a way, of what cloud is. But at the end of the day, is everything that computes that we cannot see or touch, but at the end of the day, is there for us. And something that I think is important to mention is like, in the past 10, 12, 15 years, the rise of cloud has been something, that is, from a marketing point of view, has happening more often. It has been promoted more often. But the reality is, like, the definition of cloud at the end of the day, which is a server that is not at your house or in a place where you can actually interact with it, in the case of companies in their data centers, has been around for many years, right? So the internet itself is, the definition of cloud from that point of view. But yeah, so what do you think about that? What is your perspective on it?
I agree with your definition. I think that the cloud is somebody else's computer, basically. And I'm going to bring up a meme, hopefully in the screen, because this is not my joke. I just borrowed it. But while you were talking about cloud having been there for a while, we can go on philosophically about what cloud is, but I remember working for a couple of companies that would sell airline tickets, and these companies would use little terminals connected to Sabre or Amadeus software, and they would issue those tickets online, and the reservation system would reply synchronously. And that was cloud. I mean, to your point of connecting to somebody else's computer or somebody else's infrastructure, that was already cloud. And that thing has been there for a very long time. It's been a very long time since I actually done technical support of a network, a physical network. But that is what it used to be. So to this meme of the cloud is somebody else's computer, What I mean is, if you're talking about the infrastructure, like we do for a virtual machine, then you're using, in our case, Google Cloud's computers, and we're just giving you an interface for you to deploy your own operating system and manage it from there. But you do not really need to worry about whatever hardware is managing or supporting that virtual machine. We'll do that for you, right? So it's Google's computer. And we have different layers of what gets exposed, of what kind of a service or how complex that service is and how managed it is for you, which leads me to one of the definitions that some people struggle with is infra as a service versus platform as a service versus software as a service. So if you want to get started on infra as a service while I share my screen with this beautiful slide that I found lying around.
Absolutely. So just a couple of comments, a few comments or a brief comment actually to our audience. Today we are going to be showing slides, which usually we don't do. So if you happen to be listening to the podcast, you can just jump into the video and just take a look at what we're discussing. But basically right now we're presenting a slide that has 4 different columns. That is on-prem, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, which is software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and on-prem. And basically on-prem is currently what we all knew from the very beginning. When you go to a company, you're working on your SAP and you say, hey, let's go and take a look at the hardware. The company itself has a data center, usually on-premise. That's why the term comes from there. And if you need to change the disk, or you have to do some type of maintenance on the server, you can go and do it there. Infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, it is basically the equivalent to actually getting servers for someone else, right? So you are going to be, as Lucia was explaining, I'm going to get the computers of Google or the computers of any other hyperscaler, and they are basically going to give me from the OS level and on, right? So I'm not going to be able to touch the hard drives. I'm not going to be able to deal with the network from an actual physical network of it. Of course, you can just modify the virtual network, but you're not able to deal with the network on the hard drives and so on and so forth. And from there, you can just do whatever you were doing on your on-premise servers, right? So you have OS level, you install your SAP software or whatever other software you need, and all the existing layers, as we know them, are going to be available for you to work there. So maybe you can now give us a few points on PaaS, on platform as a service.
Sure thing. So platform as a service, one example that I like to give is App Engine. I think a lot of people know App Engine. The concept behind App Engine is you take care of the code, you take care of the logics, and we'll take care of everything else. Cloud Run is similar in the sense that you will just take care of the code. We'll take care of the scaling. We'll take care of the deployment. We'll take care of giving you an endpoint. We'll take care of wiring it up to whatever networking setup you have. And you just need to focus about building the code. And that's an example in the Google Cloud world of a platform as a service. In an SAP world, a platform as a service could very much be HANA Cloud or a HANA as a service, as it was. So we'll give you the HANA. The HANA is managed. It can do a lot of things for you, but you will need to build your own calculation views on top of it. Finally, we have software as a service. In this chart that we're showing for those who are logging in from an audio platform and not necessarily looking at the video, this chart is basically drawing different lines. So for infra as a service, the line is drawn from the operating system and upwards. Everything below that is basically hardware. It's the network, it's the storage, it's the booting, the hardware, the kernel, and all of that that's actually happening underneath, and you're just getting access into the operating system. I think I will show you this later in a little demo. Then for platform as a service, this specific chart is drawing the line at the web app security and the deployment, the usage, access policies, and the content in itself. And finally, software as a service is a great example is Gmail. Another example is in the SAP world could be SuccessFactors or Ariba or Concur. You go in and the software is there, is running for you. The deployment has already been done, so you're not in charge of actually executing the code. The code is already running there. It's exposed through a couple of endpoints. You don't see the complexity of the code. Luckily for you, you do not want to see the complexity of Gmail, for example, but you need to do the configuration of the content and the access policies, right? So an example of this is when you go into Concur and your employer decided that $30 is enough for a meal. That's as much as your employer is able to configure. Everything else in the code itself, including the upgrades and revisions, are going to get deployed without you knowing. Like Gmail, for example, gets a lot of updates for all the different microservices, and you do not really notice them unless it's a very visual thing in the UI. There's a lot of things going on, and it's managed for you. So I think I covered everything, hopefully, and
Absolutely, yeah.
anything I may have missed?
Nope, no, absolutely. I think you definitely cover everything. A couple of other examples, as cloud solutions, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and so on and so forth. It's clear, the software as a service, it is definitely a trend that is moving, more into the traditional software that were always on-prem, like, the ERPs and CRMs and so on and so forth. That is transitioning very heavily in the past, 5 to 10 years, and we're going to continue to see that, right? So it's really software as a service is the way to go in this type of solutions, and there is a lot of adoption that requires, especially in the SAP world, right, where we used to be on-prem, we used to have the ability to modify absolutely everything around the software. That is definitely a trend and a transition that is going to take many years, but I'm very interested to see where that ends. What I would like to now, since we discussed about that, is like, why, from your point of view and your experience now working for Google, why would you think a company, will choose it? My 2 cents on that real quick is I think, the level of specialization that these companies has, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsoft, the hyperscalers as we know them today in the market, brings a lot of value and saves a lot of time and brings a lot of professionalism that usually it will be a deter for a company that is specialized in building sneakers, right? Or any other thing. Then just to also now have like great people working on the data centers and great people just working at those levels, at network levels. But tell us a little bit on your experience. Why do you see people more and more adopting the cloud?
Well, the what you're mentioning is one of the first things that actually comes to mind, right? So if you're manufacturing sneakers, as you said, you're better off focusing on manufacturing sneakers. And with time, I think there's been a shift in the mindset towards trusting others to do what they do best. And a great example of this is Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. I think all of these companies have proven to the world that they can manage these cloud servers and infrastructure at a very large scale. So we used to have at the beginning, and I remember thinking about that myself, well, what about the security? What about the access? And the truth is, security done by the Google engineers, I can assure you that has a lot of thinking into it. And then security of the physical data center. If you're interested in seeing this in action, I'm very jealous of Stephanie Wong. She's a senior developer advocate for Google Cloud. She was very lucky to go into a data center and did an excellent job describing what that looks like. That level of security, that level of care, that level of making sure that you're not going to get flooded, that you're not going to get a fire that's going to destroy everything, that you have backups, that you have the proper monitoring, the right hardware. In the case of Google Cloud, there's something that's unique to Google Cloud that's called live migration that allows us to actually migrate a workload in a virtual machine into another one when we detect faulty software without that virtual machine knowing, without any downtime. And you can test this at home. Hopefully, with my little demo, you can actually continue that and test this because it's great to actually see how a hardware failure happens and your HANA system continues doing whatever query and processing it's doing right on top of it, because we have this level of virtualization. But all of this is actually taken care of. And what I see, especially in security, is if a customer or a company had to invest and apply the same level of security with the same level of rigor and all of the options that we have in terms of encryption at rest, encryption in flight, management of keys, which you can do, and you can bring your own keys, management of certificates, secrets. I mean, there's so much developed for something to be secure in the cloud that if a company needed to create that themselves, it would take them a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. So I think there's an acknowledgement that all these companies, we call them hyperscalers or cloud providers, are very good at doing this, and this is why we're offering this as our business. We're in the business of offering cloud. You can stay with your company that does or manufactures sneakers, making the best sneakers, and we all benefit from that, right? One other thing that is driving customers to cloud is the elasticity. And what I mean by this is, even in a HANA system, you may be running transactions and you know that Black Friday is coming, so you're going to need to scale that. Because you do not own the servers, you can purchase more servers for the time you're running them. That's something that's great about cloud. You can pay for what you use, and then you can return them, and that's fine. If you buy it, you cannot return it. You have a very expensive bulky machine that maybe they're not being used at all, not processing anything. This applies to planning ahead as well. So if you think that in the next 10 years you're going to grow by an X%, that's fine. You don't need to deploy a machine to account for that. Well, if you're on premise, you need to deploy a machine to account for that, and also account for example, changes in the CPUs that may be out of support by SAP in a couple of years. So it makes all of that planning and all the cost reduction way easier. So you reduce cost in the actual hardware that you purchase, and you also reduce cost in the operation of that.
Absolutely. And I think, one thing I mentioned that maybe not all our listeners, could actually relate to it. But in some countries, they actually have restrictions, and when SAP started with SAP HANA and people tried to start adopting it here in Argentina, Argentina has customs restrictions. So the servers, it was very problematic to actually get the proper certified server into the country. It will take 8 months or 12 months to actually, get it through customs. And even if you get the right server, because, I actually managed a couple of servers in Heidelberg at the time, after a couple of years, those servers go out of certification, and basically, in the case of SAP and HANA, it's like, okay, it's great, you got the proper appliance, but now that appliance is out of support, you just need to get the next one, right? So now you have, as you were saying, a bulky machine, and what do you do with it? Like, and from that point of view, it's complicated. And if you think everything that goes in bulk is always going to be cheaper, right? So it's completely different if myself with my company of maybe, it's a decent sized company, but I'm not going to buy 1,000 servers or 10,000 servers or, petabytes of RAM and hard drives. I'm just going to buy what I need, and the prices will go lower and so on and so forth. So this level of specialization really brings a lot of value for the whole industry, and this is not new, but I think it's important that we touch on it, for our listeners to kind of understand what are the trades. And as you were mentioning security before, this is one of the key deterrents that I always listen. It's like, well, but the cloud is not secure. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure it's 10 times more secure than whatever approach you can come up with if you don't have like a barrage of the best info security and cybersecurity experts that companies like Google will bring on board, to actually secure your data there. So from that point of view, that's I think it's a valid excuse at the very beginning, but as you do the proper analysis, you will understand that it's really hard. It doesn't hold. But yeah, so those are definitely a couple of really good points. And I guess, because it's a podcast about SAP and Google, we also need to talk a little bit about BTP. And maybe we can walk together with you through memory lane. What do you remember of the first instance of BTP? What was the name that you knew it by?
Oh yeah, we go back to the times in which SAP ventured into having their own data centers, and it was HANA Cloud Platform, because the idea was HANA needed specialized hardware, so you could purchase that hardware or slot in that hardware in what was called originally HANA Cloud Platform. It then became SAP Cloud Platform, and the strategy from SAP started shifting also because HANA also started shifting and stopped needing a specific appliance to needing or being more open in the kind of software or hardware that it could run on or it can run on. And with that, the cloud also shifted from being specific hardware deployed in St. Leon Rock, I think it was, in some other place in Germany, to something more open like Cloud Foundry. So Cloud Foundry for a very long time was the standard for enterprise cloud native. It provides a layer of abstraction that is sort of opinionated, so you can create your own microservices with your own code, but you need to follow specific deployment guidelines and a specific way for those microservices to interact. And most of that wiring and running of the microservice is going to be managed by the platform, which is Cloud Foundry. SAP has its own version of Cloud Foundry as well. There's tweaks that SAP added on it. And the beauty about something like Cloud Foundry is that it provides enough of an abstraction layer that it can run on AWS, GCP, Azure, and Ali, which I think are all the hyperscalers or cloud providers in which it runs today. Correct. So with time, between what that was SAP Cloud Platform and a few other sprinkles that SAP threw around, it's now called Business Technology Platform as of, what's it, last year? It's been a year already since the rename?
I think so, yeah. Already.
Yeah, so, 2020 has been a very long year, so it's hard to tell.
2021, so it's almost the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, so Cloud Foundry in itself as a platform, the tendency that we are seeing at Google is that companies are moving away from it. This is not necessarily true for SAP, but companies that are using Cloud Foundry outside of SAP's version, they're moving away and they're moving into Kubernetes, and this has been a tendency or a trend for a while. SAP has also their own version of a deployment or simplified version of a deployment through Kubernetes, which is called the Kima runtime, which is a reinterpretation of Knative. I always mentioned Cloud Run is one of my favorite platforms on Google, and I've said that while I was an SAP employee. The reason for that, it's also an interpretation of Knative or an implementation of Knative. And it makes it very easy for somebody who has no idea of containers or hasn't seen a Docker file in their lives to actually get up and running with a containerized application that will auto-scale, scale to zero, charge you for only what it needs, and expose an endpoint, which is PaaS, as we were talking earlier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just to add something to the more SAP folks on our audience today, prior when it was SAP Cloud Platform and when the focus was having being or working directly from SAP data centers, that the runtime was Neo, and to these days this holds, right? So if you create an extension to SuccessFactors or to any other solution, using Neo, which Neo is a Java runtime. It's still going to hold. It's going to be supported anyways. The recommendation from SAP right now is just if you can build something from scratch, just do it in CF, do it in Cloud Foundry, and then bring your own runtime there. We have experience of developing different things on Node.js, using Nest on CF and so on and so forth. And then if you are a little bit more adventurous and you just want to do some hybrid things, just go to hyperscaler and just play with it. It is plenty of things to do here, and I think this is something we discussed many times, Lucia, you and I. This is a huge opportunity for SAP technical professionals to reinvent their careers, from different angles, as a developer or as an infrastructure person. This is the time where the industry is pushing you to actually learn these new technologies, and they need you to learn them, right? So before, maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago, it's like, well, can I do this? Like, well, this is not really business. The business is not driving this, so you can do it on your personal time. Right now, it's like they're urging you to learn these things because the money you can save by doing things like Lucia was explaining about, scaling up and down and saving a ton of money on processing is definitely one of the key drivers that we always have in a discussion with the managers. Like, well, can we do this? Like, what is the business value of this? Well, it's this amount of money now. So this is definitely a good segue for you to continue investing in your professional career and learn some new things. This is time, guys. But yeah, without further ado, and just being conscious of the time, because we are trying to compress our podcast into 30 minutes due to recommendations of many of you by the ways of Google, YouTube Analytics. So now, where are we going right now, Lucia? So what do we want to do at this moment in time?
I think my DevRels past is kicking in, and I feel the urge because you just said this is the time to learn, and I agree with that. I'm going to get some heat for this. SAP is actually giving you a segue if you're lazy and you want to stick to what you know or most of it, and you have ABAP in the cloud for extensions. Mm-hmm. But if you want to future-proof your career, this is a great opportunity to do so, right? Because you can combine your knowledge of enterprise, your knowledge of SAP and the data model, and all of this abbreviation of German words that you have in the data model that's very specific knowledge that we gathered in the years, and actually take it to the platforms that everybody else is using. So we spoke about Kubernetes. Everybody else is going into Kubernetes. And this has been happening for a while. So it's not something that is new. It's not something that people are just discovering. There's a lot already there, and there's a lot of footprint already there. And that will give you actually the ability to move around and to have a choice, right? Not being stuck with a specific platform or a specific language. You can just have the choice and choose whatever you want to work on. That may be ABAP as well. Sometimes, every once in a while, I get nostalgic and I need to do a little bit of a startup selection, mm-hmm. in Eclipse, because I evolved a little bit. Yeah, yes, Eclipse. Of course, ABAP on Eclipse.
For the fancy people, maybe Visual Studio. But Eclipse is fair enough. Let me make a parenthesis real. Like, what is your top 2 of new languages? If you have to recommend, someone, I personally am more kind of like Python, TypeScript person. But what are your choices on 2 languages? For people to actually go take a look and maybe try to make a decision on that.
I think Python is easy enough. And
mm-hmm.
and there's a lot. It's especially for data management. I normally go into Python because that's also where a lot of the things are implemented, right? So I've been doing a lot with Cloud Composer lately, and or Apache Airflow. It's the same. It's our managed version mm-hmm. of Apache Airflow, and what basically that does is moving data around. And I've been implementing change data capture using Composer, and that is done in Python. What happens to me with Python and any other language, my other go-to language may be Java as well.
Mm-hmm.
depending on what I'm solving for. And sometimes it's not entirely a language, but I may use Node.js when I'm doing like a cloud function or something like that, because it's easy, it's nice and easy. I think where my main problem is, because I'm not coding in these languages every single day and all the time, I need a little bit of a startup. And that's fine. I'm saying this because I think that most people hear this like, how many languages do you program in? And it's not like you give me a computer.
Imposter syndrome, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's completely fine. I was talking to an engineering manager the other day, and he told me the same thing. Yeah, that's normally I have the same problem. If I haven't coded for a while, I need to look at the syntax real hard and remember, like, I don't need to put a semicolon at the end of this sentence in this language. It's like the wires cross. But yeah, I would say start in Python, especially if you're going for data analytics. Get acquainted with the libraries and what people are doing. Like Pandas was something that I picked up very quickly, and it's very useful even for something that normally I would have done with a spreadsheet. And now I default into going in and processing simple data with Pandas in a Python script. Node.js is good for the examples that we were given, like a cloud function or app engine. It's good if you're getting started, or if you have some kind of a Fury-esque background that you've been using. And Java as well. How about you? I'm going to start sharing my screen, by the way, so that we can show people what...
Absolutely. Start showing your screen. No, as I was mentioning before, I'm a big fan of Python because I have a lot of fun working with it. So I started with JavaScript like 10, 12, 13 years ago. I ended up liking it, but I think I definitely like more TypeScript. I will say to whoever is listening to right now, and they are ABAPers, pick up JavaScript. It's going to be painful at the beginning, but it really opens up to work on Node.js in the backend, or to work on the front end, where if it's with Angular or Fury, UI5 or whatever. That's a really opening doors type of language. It's painful at the beginning. Just bear with the language, and don't try to learn it from ABAP. Just learn JavaScript, as JavaScript. There is not a set way. I was a technical writer for how to learn JavaScript as a developer. Horrible idea of a book. So just learn JavaScript as a JavaScript developer, and that's it. So now let's go into your screen again. All the people that is listening, just jump into the video. There is actually stuff for you to see. Go ahead.
Yeah. So as I was saying, my DevRels past is kicking in. I feel the need for people to go and direct them into the documentation. So if you want to do functions, cloud functions, or Cloud Run. Even with Cloud Run, if you Google my name, you'll find something with HDI containers that you can go and do. But since we're talking about infrastructure today, this is where I'm going. So I'm in the documentation, and you will see a lot of guides here that start from how to plan for deployment, how to do sizing, considerations around versions of operating system, database, and so forth. It's very important that you get acquainted with that. However, I'm going to jump straight into what I wanted to show, which is what it looks like to have a virtual machine in a Google Cloud Platform. So I'm going to start with actually doing the deployment of this, because it's going to take a while. So I'm going to use, do you want to do the described audio for this?
Absolutely. So currently we are in something called Cloud Shell Editor, and then we are in the actual shell from Lucia. Basically what she is invoking is SheCloud. SheCloud is one of the many most powerful tools. Can I call it tool, or it's more than a tool, right?
Yeah.
How would you describe it?
The G-Cloud is a CLI, so
CLI,
it's technically a CLI, yes.
Yeah, gotcha. So basically, what she's invoking right now is Deploy Manager. Deploy Manager, it is one of the many services that Google has, and basically she's going to pass a YAML file. A YAML file, for those who never heard of those, you use it, for describing deployment of whatever you have, whether it could be a server, a service, or it could be a server. In this case, She is describing a full-blown set of systems, and this at some moment in time she's going to briefly explain what infrastructure as a code is, and she's also going to touch in something else. But guys, don't go crazy. Infrastructure as a code is a full, I will say, series of podcasts almost. So
yeah.
But we can give just an initial description on that. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, for the described audio. So I'm leaving this gcloud command that is run deployment manager. Deployment manager is a tool that Google has to basically read a YAML file, as you were saying, that is going to run a specific script. You can actually go and check what the script is doing. It's in Python, and it's calling a bunch of other stuff like bash or shell scripts. And in this specific case, I went into the documentation that I was saying before, and you'll see the step-by-step on how to deploy this. What we're going to end up with is, as you're seeing here, high availability setup. That means you have a primary server and a secondary server, one in one region. The secondary is in a separate zone. And then in a separate region, you have a disaster recovery in server. There's a lot to read around this. A very long story short, when you are looking to have business continuity in case something goes wrong, in case one of your databases decides to have an issue, in case one of your zones, for whatever the reason, is down, or you need to do some kind of upgrade into the machine, you need to add more CPU or more RAM to scale it up, then it's a good idea to have two servers running at the same time. The primary will be serving the transactions, for example, and the secondary will be getting replication. For this specific scenario, we're using HANA replication. It's a native capability that HANA has specifically for this. And what's going to happen is each transaction that the primary receives is going to be replicated in real time, synchronously, into the secondary. You have the option to actually wait for the secondary to acknowledge that replication has been successful. And if something goes wrong and the primary, for whatever reason, goes down, the secondary is talking to the primary all the time. And you have, in this case, an internal load balancer and a couple of scripts that are actually doing health check probes to make sure that the systems are running. And when the primary stops responding, then the secondary takes over and says, now I'm the primary. So all the connections go into, immediately into the secondary, and the secondary continues to serve transactions. Because this is so fast, and because you have a synchronous replication, you haven't lost any data, even though one of your servers has gone down. Now, if Godzilla came and deleted an entire region, let's say Godzilla came into Iowa and destroyed Iowa, then you can have a second region that has a copy of your system. In the HA scenario, I was describing real-time asynchronous replication. In the case of a region, the recommendation is to have it many kilometers away, so having a synchronous replication and the latency will not exactly work for the system. So some customers choose tools that are shipping the logs all the time and is not synchronous. Some customers have specific tools that are feeding off the backup, and that backup is decentralized and is distributed. So when the DR region needs to come up, it just taps into that backup service. So there are different ways of actually doing this technically, but you get the whole idea. If a zone entirely goes down and your primary and secondary are compromised, you'll have a disaster recovery. What I just deployed with that single YAML definition and the, let's see if it's ready, and this Python script with deployment manager was exactly that setup for high availability, not for disaster recovery. And the deployment manager, that script that I was showing before, is going and fetching the software. I have it in a bucket. I have a HANA installation, and this script is going to create all of the users in that HANA machine and is going to do the configuration for the high availability in my primary and my secondary. All of this is going to be automatic, and this is the output of the deployment manager. Looking at this is a little bit boring, so I'm going to move into the actual Pantheon, and just give me 1 second here, because I still pretend to this day that I do not need glasses, and it turns out I do.
For those who are listening, she's currently on GCP, on the GCP computer ancient section, taking a look at the VM instances, and it's setting up a filter just to bring specific the VM instances. There are the ones on the project around high availability, so we can actually take a look at what was created.
Thank you for that. So yes, we have these two machines that were created by, I'm going back into the Cloud Shell here, and here I found my mouse, my cursor, and you see that I call this HANA primary, HANA secondary. I gave the tags that I want. These are tags that I had pre-created, but I want to allow access to the ICMP protocols, to specific SAP protocols that could be ports like the GUI, what the GUI needs, and access through SSH. These are the two zones that I chose, the type of machine, how big it needs to be. And the networks, please do not use the default network for real life. I used it because this is a demo. And of course the Linux image, that could be SUSE or Red Hat, because we have a HANA on top of it. And this is what this machine looks like. If I go into this virtual machine, I will likely see the progress of the deployment and the script.
It's taking a while, but it's loading. There we go.
It took a little bit, and we can go straight into the serial port. And this is, while the machine is configuring itself, you can see that it's doing a lot of stuff for us, and it's creating users, and it's going to download the HANA installation media from the bucket that I asked it to, and it's going to try and install it, and it's all going to be ready in about 20 minutes. We're not going to wait for it. I just wanted to show you what actual infrastructure as a service looks like. And as I said before, we have access to the operating system. By the state of this deployment, I should be able to access the operating system. Not do much about it, because probably the HANA users have not been created yet, but it's going to create the SID. I went somewhere else. It's going to create the SID ADM system user. And if I click on this SSH, I will access the operating system, which is what we promised, right? We have the network is already there, so we just configure the firewall, and now we have access to this virtual machine from the operating system up. Some customers choose to bring their own images of the operating system. Some customers choose to do different levels of encryptions or bring their own keys, and that's the beauty of all of this. So here we are. I don't think I'm going to be able to... Yeah, the user does not yet exist because it's in the process of creating it, but if I log back in 20 minutes, we should be able to log in with Uni ADM, because I chose the SID of my HANA system to be Uni. And there's a much better complete demo running around in the web. I'm going to put the link in the YouTube, together with a bunch of other documentation that if you're interested, you can go and check.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is thanks for the introduction. This was great. In addition to that, on the links on the description down below on the video, you're going to be able to find a Coursera training. This was it's called Deploying SAP on Google Cloud Platform. It's a great training. I think it's a few days, but when I took it, it was like 4 hours one day and 2 hours the other day. It's great because you actually have this scenario of high availability. You are actually able to do it yourself, doing that training as well of the examples that Lucia is going to share with us. So from that point of view, you are covered. So, we are getting to kind of the end of today's podcast. As we were saying before, we were just trying to comprise, sip a little bit the content. So we make it less than an hour. Let us know what you think about the new format. Speed up a little bit, but we're just trying to, keep everything tight. Let us know what you think about the new format. Lucia, going to you. Any shout outs on this episode that you would like to hand?
Yes. First, I want to thank people for the feedback and for telling us that an hour is too long, but they really like the content. That we appreciate that. And also a little shout out to Awkward Baxter. He's one of my colleagues. He's in the engineering team for SAP. And not only is he very talented with the engineering work he does, he also built our mascot. He drew our mascot. And by my request, that mascot has a tie. That's why I'm wearing a tie that some of my former colleagues gave me for my birthday a very long time ago. But yes, thank you for our mascot, and we hope people like it as much as we do.
Absolutely, and the shout outs from my side. I just want to say hi to Patricia. She was a colleague that we worked together in Adidas for a very long time, and I think it was 3 or 4 years ago we were discussing about. I was telling her one day I will have a podcast, and she was like, "Oh, I would love to hear your podcast." And in this opportunity, I'm just going to say hi to her, and I'm going to tag her on LinkedIn so she can actually see, the third podcast, and then she can go and see the other two. And of course, if I'm talking about the wonderful people at Adidas, I also have to say hi to Manuela and Julia, also great colleagues, always very fun to work with them. So shout out to the three of them. Also, big thanks to all of you guys for continuing to stick up with us, and as Lucia was saying, providing some feedback. And without further ado, I'm handing over to you so we can just say goodbye to everyone.
Absolutely. Before I do that, I have a lot of anticipation for our next episode.
Yes.
Because we have some special guests who specialize in migrations into S/4 HANA and custom code bases. So I'm very, very excited about that. And yes, you all have a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the week, and night if you're going to sleep.
Absolutely. It is 2 a.m. 46 here, and I think it's 1:46 there. I
Correct.
also want to thank to Riverside founder to make us record this for the second time. Internal joke, but not so internal. So thanks everyone. Stay tuning in on the next episodes, and have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.